Hello there. Hope you're having a great day. We are coming back here for Everyday Ordinary Life with Mark. We are in the midst of talking about how God uses little for much, that God can take your little and make much out of it, that God can take the collected efforts that may not add to much and do much with it. He can bless those we love. He can bless people we don't even know. He can bless people worldwide. And he can bless us when we give our little, which he turns into much. One of the best known stories in all of the New Testament dealing with this very topic is in the midst of the account of Jesus feeding thousands. There are actually two stories of Jesus feeding thousands in the New Testament. One feeding 4,000 men plus women and children, and one 5,000. And in the story of Jesus feeding 5,000 in John chapter 6, John gives us a little more detail than does the synoptics, Matthew, Mark, Luke. We see in John a detail about a young boy who gives his little, out of which God makes much. What happens is the crowds are gathered and Jesus is teaching, and as we can imagine, if the teaching is long and they've traveled a ways, people are growing in hunger, and Jesus is not just concerned about spiritual needs. He knows the physical needs, and so he's going to do something about that. And so he talks to the disciples and brings them in on the deal, and they do not know what to do. And this is where the boy enters the story. In chapter 6 of John, beginning at verse 8, it says, "Another one of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, spoke up. 'Here is a boy with 5 small barley loaves and 2 small fish, but how far will they go among so many?' And Jesus proceeds from there to take that fish and bread, and out of it multiplies it to the power of his Father, and to do amazing things, feeding thousands and thousands of people." I want you to notice a couple things in that verse that are very significant. One is that it's just 2 items. It's just bread and it's fish. But in addition to that, we find the word small. Now, that's not all that significant, we might think, but it actually is. Now, big bread and big fish would be significant as well, but it's interesting that the detail here in the gospel is that it's small loaves of bread and small fish. Now, why is that important? It emphasizes, again, as we were talking about, that God uses little for much, or God uses small in order to do the big. We don't know the backstory on this boy. I'd like to imagine his mom packing his lunch that morning, and the story of Jesus, this great teacher and miracle worker, has spread across the land. He wants to go see this for himself, and so he travels with his lunch and goes, and he overhears the story perhaps of the problem at hand, the hunger of the crowd and not enough food. And somewhere along the way he has an engagement with Andrew, and Andrew says, "Here's this boy's lunch." And we're not really given the details that the boy handed over his lunch, but I don't think the disciples are going to steal a boy's lunch to make this happen. So I see a generous boy here coming and allowing Andrew to take his lunch and give it to Jesus. That's the first thing we need to think about when we look at our lives, is what are we willing to give up for Jesus? There was no promise to this boy at the time that he'd get anything back. There was no promise that his needs would be met. After all, there's no one else around, it seems like, with bread and fish. He's the only one. There's sometimes we have things that others don't, and are we willing to give up so that we can help others? And he did, and out of this, God made much. Jesus could have called manna down from heaven. Jesus could have had quail, as we see in the Old Testament, appear out of nowhere. Jesus could have just said, poof, and there's lunch. But he chose to use this little boy's small lunch to do much for the kingdom of God. And I love the story because it tells us it's not just the people who are educated in the spiritual things of this world. It's not just the people that have the idea of what it means to be mature in the faith that God uses. God uses a very simple boy with a small lunch to do great things. So no matter your stature, whether that be physically or educationally or financially, no matter what your stature, God can use you and use what you have to bless others. We learn a lesson of generosity, and we learn a lesson that God can use our generosity, no matter how much that is. So I encourage you again, as we talked about last week, to be a generous person, because out of that generosity, God is going to do much.